Hello and welcome everybody to According to Andrew number 95. It has been a minute, but I just finished Lord of the Rings and I felt like it would be a travesty if I didn't talk about how great it was and just the various things I was able to pull from it. And I want to talk about it. And this is obviously isn't going to reach nearly the level that Rachel Fulton Brown reaches in her deep dive on uh, Tolkien and the Lord of the Rings and all that stuff, and I've listened to about 30 episodes of that series or something, and it's absolutely fantastic. I actually started listening to it before I read the books, so I had some stuff to kind of pull from and reference to as I was going through the books, and that was kind of fun. This is the first time I'd ever read the books, which is a travesty. I watched the movies. I was like, I don't know, maybe between 10 and 15 when the movies came out, and I'd watched those years ago, and then because I had watched them, I never really got around to um, reading the books. Because, like, I mean, how different could they be? And to be honest, the movies do a good job of representing the books, but there was a couple things in the movies that always kind of bugged me, um, and I thought that the way that they were addressing the books was much better. To just dive into that, uh, so I found a lot of moments in the books kind of inexplicable uh, in the movies that were done much better in the books. There's moments in the movies where they kind of gave various characters the proverbial idiot football and would have them do stuff that just seemed out of character, didn't really fit, seemed like they could just explain it in a slightly better manner. And sure, it wouldn't necessarily fix a situation, but it would make a bad situation. It wouldn't make a bad situation worse, which is some of the stuff that seemed to come across when I was watching the movie. The moment that always stood out to me was when Gollum's at the pool, trying to catch his fresh fish, and Faramir's gonna have him killed, and Frodo is like, no, he's our guide. I want to save him, kind of thing. And then like that interaction in the movies just always came off bad to me. I don't remember how it's done in the extended versions, but it is very different in the book where instead, Frodo does kind of explain it. Gollum's still hurt. He doesn't really forgive him, kind of thing. But at least there's like an attempt of like, hey, my hands were kind of tied thing. So the fact that that was in there really kind of satisfied my thing. Also, they did a much better job in the books. In the movies, they just kind of make Frodo come off as kind of naive, overly trusting of like Gollum, who is obviously someone he wouldn't want to trust or anything like that. And I find in the books he's much more wise and cunning, and a much better fit for being the ring bearer because it's a big responsibility and a big burden that is placed on him. And in the books, they show that he has the noble character to really fulfill that task. And in the movies, it doesn't come off that way. So those are the things that I think really the book did much better justice. Uh, so other notes on there. Interesting, and I know Tolkien hates the term allegory, but I found it very interesting. At the very end, there was this little part where they're describing Mordor, and it's like this lifeless field, and then they fall down into these bushes, and they're wiry, and they have like these long spikes and stuff like that. And it was in that moment that I had remembered that uh, Tolkien was a World War I vet, and Mordor is the no man's land, right? Absolute, like there's the way it's described, and then these bushes they fall into are, from my perspective, obviously barbed wire, right? Oh, I thought no bush or shrub would grow out here, and the way the barbed wire was laid across in the no man's land of the trenches and stuff like that, if it worked as a bush, but it wasn't really a living thing, as it were. So I just found that kind of interesting. Um, it might just be where I'm at in life because this book just like really it started slow. I was kind of dragging my feet when I was reading it. The first section kind of took a while for me to get into, but I really grew to appreciate that part of the book later on. But I'll touch on that in a minute. Uh, but it might just be where I am in life because the Hobbit's journey, the Reluctance journey, just always strikes a chord. And I know that's part of the whole myth arc, right? There's the call to adventure, then the, oh no, I don't want to go on to adventure, then being kind of forced into the adventure. I know that's part of the myth, and maybe that's just the thing that always gets me. But it's just the hobbits, I think, embody it in a different way, right? Because um, the hobbits are in a world that is uncertain and full of peril, larger than themselves. But you must be brave on your journey and journey into it regardless. And that's kind of how we are, right? There's a wide world out there, and it's larger than life. It's bigger than us individually. But still, we must, and things are uncertain, especially in these times right now. But still, we must put on a brave face and work our way through all these issues. So I find that the Hobbit spirit is that of humans, called to be greater than their stature suggests, and yet rising to the occasion. um, I'll touch on that in a minute. Oh, and then so to get back to the other part about the first part of the book being slow, but then really kind of relating to that later after I had kind of gotten through the rest of the book and was reflecting on it more. Um, so one thing that I really liked is that in the movie you wouldn't get the sense that there's like 40 years that pass between uh, Frodo being handed the ring, or maybe it's 20. It's a long time. Basically, uh, in the movie, it comes across as like being, maybe a year's time, maybe like 5 at most, if you're really kind of stretching it. But it's like almost 20 years kind of thing. Um, but I kind of appreciated that because sometimes we kind of can feel stuck in a rut or stuck kind of in our place and not really knowing where to go, not feeling like we're kind of treading water, we're not really moving forward in life, and some kind of being stuck, feeling that we have to go do something, we have to make our impact on the world, the time's running out. And that's a good driving motivator, right? That's the thing that gets us up in the morning, the thing that makes us do something, the thing that maybe puts us on the right path if we've been, you know, making incorrect decisions. And that can be as serious as drug abuse type stuff to as simple as just not eating healthy. uh, and that slow plotting is interesting because it does reflect life so much. It takes years for things to kind of come to fruition, but during that time it can feel like you're spinning your wheels. I feel that it relates well to the seeming never-end COVID stuff, where we must simply endure, but sometimes our impatience starts to breed a hopelessness that it'll never end, or in Frodo's case, that his adventure will never come. And there's so many elements within the Lord of the Rings that just have a human element to them that I find really compelling. Um, Talking about I'm gonna jump over to the social sexual hierarchy real quick because I find Sam the most interesting person in this regard, because I don't exactly know where to place him, and it's not really super important, but he, Sam's supposed to be the everyday man, and so therefore he's the most compelling and interesting character, uh, in a sense. There's you like people like Aragorn and Gimli and Legolas and stuff like that, but they have like an air of nobility about them. Or people like Gandalf are wizards. There's magic. It's kind of foreign to us. The hobbits are supposed to be us. They're supposed to be kind of the reflection, and Sam's supposed to be more of the everyday kind of person. So he's the most relatable character within the story. um, and so Sam seems like he might be a Delta that is called into a Bravo status due to the need of Frodo. But alternatively, you could say that he was always a Bravo as well, because of his unquestioned loyalty, his exceptional loyalty to Frodo, is kind of above and beyond what I would see as someone potentially just kind of called to the role and not naturally be fitting to them. So those are kind of my thoughts on that. To go a little bit deeper into it, um, into that aspect is the interesting relationship of Frodo, Sam, and Gollum, because Gollum's the Gamma, and then Frodo's your Bravo, and then the leaders, or no, Frodo's the Alpha, the leader of the group, and Sam is the Bravo. The Lord of the Rings seems to imply that the subversive nature of Gammas is in ways more grating to the Bravos than it is to the Alphas. Sam trusts Frodo, but since he does not know what is going on in his head, it appears at times that Frodo is trusting of Gollum when he most certainly is not. However, because this information can't always be communicated to keep group cohesion, the Bravo is left looking at decisions that seem blatantly foolish, but his general sense of duty and trust in the Alpha will be deferred to when most of these decisions are made. Though, as in Sam's case, they might somewhat be openly contentious of the decisions. Eventually, either the intentions of the decision will be revealed to the Bravo, restoring his faith in the Alpha's decision-making, or the issue comes to a head and Bravo forces a decision that either expels him or the Gamma from the group, destroying the group. This does go to show why it is best to keep Gammas out of an organization as best as possible, but when it is necessary to include one like in the Lord of the Rings example, it is important to address the real concerns of the Bravo from time to time. Which, I don't know, it was kind of an interesting observation. That was in the second book, especially when Gollum's like plotting behind their back, and Sam feels like Frodo is just kind of being led in this folly direction, and doesn't actually believe that Gollum is capable of any evil and stuff like that. And he does a good job to show that that is not the case, and that he is he knows more that's going on than he lets on, which is a smart way to play your hand. One thing I do have to say is, so usually when I finish a book or a series or something like that, especially like a fantasy one, where you go on this journey with the characters and stuff like that, you always feel kind of sad that you have to let the book go. But dude, the ending of this book just really hit me harder than most, which was interesting. I think it was just because so many of the things and aspects within the book are much more relatable and real than a lot of other fantasy books that I've read. And to this point, there are a lot of epic tales of journey that feel both like lifetime and a brief moment. That's kind of because that feeling is kind of what gives you the blues at the end of a book. Maybe if you're a really fast reader, this isn't a problem to you personally, but you reflect on the book and it feels like so much has happened, and yet no time has seemingly passed at all at the exact same time. And I feel like that kind of goes back to the human nature aspect of it, where you can summarize someone's life in a paragraph or an entire book, and both are in a sense reasonable ways to describe their life, right? When I reflect on what happened within the Lord of the Rings, it feels like, oh, if you just hit the key highlights, you're like, but like this happened, this, you can just create a list of bullet points, and in one sense you're like, not a lot happened, but at the same time, like everything happened, a lot happened, and obviously that's getting into the details, the description of the scenery, all that stuff, and it's this kind of interesting dynamic where you're both you can be stretched out and compressed in these different ways, and I guess a lot of these are just kind of feelings, and I'm not the greatest at describing them, but I'm doing what I can. Going back to the Sam and Frodo, I think the end of the book is a very emotional hit, because that's when Frodo heads off to the Grey Havens and says goodbye to Sam, and it's just really a sad moment, especially since these two have been inseparable, and this is really the only time they've been separated in the entire book. And through this whole long journey, this whole aspect of all the things that they had to do, they never parted ways, and now they finally have to part. And that again goes to the human condition of having to say goodbye to loved ones and things like that. As much as you want to have your loved ones around for all eternity, your grandparents, your parents, all that stuff, eventually we have to say goodbye at a certain point, and there's the hope of rejoining them in the Grey Havens or in heaven or things like that, but that's a hope that's far off, and it's not folly to have said hope, but that the hope of a distant payoff does little to sweeten the bitterness of the moment that you're in. And I find it interesting that it kind of, like, stories like that help remind me of my grandparents and my people that I've lost within my life and stuff like that, and in ways that just kind of trying to remember them, trying to remember various days of remembrance, don't seem to bring up memories like that as much. You know, because you can kind of, the aspects within the story, you can kind of weave in your own experiences and be like, oh, I remember when I did that with my grandparents and stuff like that, or things of that nature, and it helps kind of bring the memories back alive, which is interesting because it's like, well, it's fictional, but then because of this aspect, it kind of creates like a realness uh, that you don't find in other mediums. And this happens with other books and stuff like that, but I don't know. I noticed it more with The Lord of the Rings than I can remember from other books. Obviously, this one's most current in my memory, so that could be the reason for that. Let's go through the rest of my notes here. Um, so I had a couple minor thoughts on some of the. Obviously, Tolkien's a brilliant writer, and if I ever write something, it's never gonna achieve the level of his stuff. But one thing that I did find kind of interesting was the distances people traveled and the time between the Helm's Deep fight and the Minas Tirith fight. So the distance people traveled, like, I've done some hiking, and it was in mountains, so that's a little different. But these people are hiking cross country, so it's like, it's different, but at the same time, like, I've had to walk through um like tall grasses and stuff like that. It's not easy. So most of the time they're not on roads, and yet they're still covering like 20 miles in a day. And you have like short little hobbits with little hobbit legs and stuff like that, and they're still covering 20 miles in a day. So obviously these people are going to be way more in shape and fit than I ever was, and things like that. But at the same time, if you look at how they describe the hobbits, they're kind of easy going. Like, they have a softer lifestyle that is more akin. We have, our modern day is very soft, but you know, still, like, hobbits have kind of a softer lifestyle that is not 20-mile journey every day kind of thing, and that adjustment would be pretty hard to make. So that part seemed a little extreme, but it's kind of, it's not like it really distracts from the book. I just kind of, like, from my own experience, I was kind of like, this is a lot of hiking, dude. um and it seemed like it was overly rushed with the Helm's Deep into the Minas Tirith thing. I get that was pretty much the point, so maybe I'm kind of defeating my own point here with saying that it was too, not enough time to really get people going and stuff like that. But I'm just imagining the logistical nightmare of trying to move 5,000 people within a week's time over this huge journey with, like, no, we haven't really gotten provisions set up and things like that. Um, they're given, like, no time to get all this sorted and stuff like that. And the whole point that was part of the point, was not to give them time so that they couldn't gather all of their troops and they just had to set out with what they had. But at the same time, it there was parts of the book that were really slow, right? They spent like a month in Rivendell, this in a month in, like, Lothlorien. It's like you couldn't give them like an extra week. It still seems like if it was a 2-week thing, it would still be pressing enough, but, like, also make it so that, oh yeah, we can make sure that we have our provisions, that we're getting the proper food and supplies stocked up for this long journey across country to ride to our doom, or hopefully save the West, kind of thing. So that aspect kind of threw me for a bit of the loop, but it's not really the end of the world. And then to kind of help wrap up some of these things, so I know Tolkien thought that the West was in its twilight when he was alive, but you can tell by the writing that he was still close enough to a more upstanding age that feels like it doesn't exist anymore. When you read his descriptions of Aragorn, and when he takes on his kingly duty and the air of nobility that surrounds him, it just feels like an idea from an era that has gone past. it doesn't. Some of the descriptions and some of this idea of uh, moral leadership and strong nobility that stand up and do the right thing, kind of, it's kind of Victorian-esque, and it doesn't really fit in our era. And I'm kind of sad that that doesn't really exist anymore. And obviously, that's something you can work on to bring back, but it's just it when you haven't like it's hard to know what it's like when you haven't seen it yourself, kind of thing. Um, you can read about books and things like that, but you don't know what the culture like. I can read about the Middle Ages and stuff like that, but really getting into understanding what the cultural day-to-day life was for people and things like that, and the dignity and air of nobility that people held themselves to, and not just to seem better than they were, but to actually be a shining light and an example for people. Um, it just it's hard to it's not that it's hard to relate to in a sense, but more importantly, it seems like a sign of something that was lost. Um, so the notion of the fourth era and magic disappearing out of the world, it feels like it was a delineation of our own time, which is before World War One and after World War Two, which was the transition period. And what stands on either side of them are the two different eras. So basically, the third age in our era, our third age was the Victorian era, and the fourth age is World War Two and before, and the transition era is between World War One and World War Two. And if you kind of look back on society and life and what things were kind of like, it does feel like, you know, those were different times. Another delineation that seems like it was a pretty major shift, at least in American history, is pre-Civil War, post-Civil War, right? You have this kind of society was this way, and now it's this way, and maybe one that we're potentially living through right now. It's hard to say when you're in the moment. Is um, you know pre pre-COVID, post-COVID kind of thing. And I think some of that might have in times in the future, you might say like that the whole process started with like the 9/11 situation, and things slowly boiled, and then when they really kicked off with the COVID thing, then you have so our transition period is basically 9/11 to COVID, and um, you know, so you and then the fifth era basically starts. And who knows what's going to be in that section? Maybe we'll get back to some of the nobler times that are thought of in the Victorian era. I know it had its issues and all that, but there's aspects of that society that are no longer there, and it's kind of lost. Um, and then last couple things, the orcs fit SJWs to a T. They destroy things simply for the fact that of the destruction of self. They hate the good, the beautiful, the true. They cannot create, only mock or distort. They turn on each other at the slightest provocation or any chance to get ahead, and they are kept in line by fear and mutual hatred for the good, the beautiful, and the true. So that's kind of interesting. Um, and then Saruman shows how evil operates and turns on itself when he convinces Wormtongue to do his dirty work, and then immediately throws him under the bus. Wormtongue claims that he was doing it at Saruman's bidding. Saruman denies it, kind of thing. And this again relates back to the COVID situation, where you're going to have a lot of people who are like, there's going to be leaders that try to shirk their responsibility and their culpability uh, in like the vaccine program or things of that nature. It's going to be funny if this video gets flagged for that, um, because they're like, well, you chose it, and it's like, well, it was coerced, or you lied to me and stuff like that. But none of that. These leaders aren't truly leaders because they don't take responsibility for the actions that they set the course on others. Um, and you see the evidence of this behavior in politics and all over the place. Politics is probably the most glaring one. Uh, because the person that coerced another person into action, they can, to a certain sense, rightly claim, well, I didn't do that action. at the same time, if you're in a leadership position and stuff like that, and you're telling people this is the action to do, you are partially responsible for that action. But the wicked will never take responsibility for that, and that shows their poor moral character and penchants for wickedness. So that basically wraps up my thoughts on Lord of the Rings. Kind of, uh, you know, slapped together of a whole bunch of different things. Um, Maybe I didn't really talk about the greatness, but like just that's just kind of the skim surface of all the various things and that you can pull from and learn from Lord of the Rings. It's Lord of the Rings is a great story because it's a human story, um, and it talks about trial and and uh, suffering, hope, and despair, and making sure that to push to the last, um, regardless of seemingly insurmountable odds, and making things work out in the end. So if you haven't read the book, I highly recommend it. It can take a bit to get into, and it can be hard. I definitely fell asleep a couple of times while I was reading it, but just take it slowly, blot on just a little bit every day, and when you get done with it, I'm sure you'll be very glad that you read it. So, uh, anyway, this has been According to Andrew. Hope you guys have a good day, and goodbye.